some quotables, some things said that people were like, oh my goodness, that was good. I even heard a couple of amens from the crowd earlier. So I want to practice something today. It's been done, and just like a good crowd, it's been organically done already. But for those folks that may not have seen it or caught on, I just want everybody on the same page. So when you hear something good, when you hear something that catches your ear, when you hear something that you're like, that's what I'm talking about, we can go ahead and snap our fingers. Let's bring it old school. Let's practice that today. Snap our fingers. You know? Also, there's another thing that you can do that I like to do. You'll probably hear it from time to time. You do the Can everybody do that with me? It's usually followed by a nod. Just like this. Now you'll do a lot of that with this Power Pack panel coming up here right now, because they're talking about access to care with clinical trials. So please give a round of applause for our next panelists. Come on up.
We were going to do a choreographed entrance, but we couldn't get it together. So we thought it would just be better to walk up. Good afternoon. This is a fantastic event. I want to, before we even begin, I want to give a shout out to Reggie and his team for putting this together. Fantastic work. It gets better each year, so wonderful. And I also want to talk about BDO real quick, because 20 years of standing in the gap for patients should not be overlooked. So give BDO their credit for being there for patients when, all right, so all the love and festivities are over. I have a wonderful panel here. We have a wonderful panel here talking about access to care. It's something that's vitally important, and how do we do that? How do we increase access to care? How do we get better care for our patients? And I'm sure everybody on this panel is going to get some great answers. So we're going to jump right in. For time's sake, we're going to ask that you introduce yourself when I direct a question to you, so we won't have to go through, because you all are so well accomplished. You'll be the whole time to introduce you and give you the right justice. So first, we'll start with Sandra. First of all, congratulations on being honored today.
Thank you.
One of our top Black health. Give it. We'd love for you to set our panel with your lived experience and barriers to access related to skin health. And if you have some success stories, we love to hear success stories.
No, sure. And I just want to thank BDO for this amazing opportunity. I want to take it very personally. I think I'm obsessed with skincare. That's how I like to describe it. And it started for me really in my early 20s with my desire to get facials. So it was more of an aesthetic approach, if you will. But I really didn't think about healthcare from the standpoint, from a medical lens, when you think about skincare, similar to what we heard on the other panel, until much later in life. And it wasn't until I changed primary care providers, and I had an African-American primary care provider, and as she was doing a review of symptoms with me, or review of systems, she started talking about my skin as an organ. She started talking about, no, Sandra, it's not just about sunscreen. It's not just about staying hydrated. I need you to look at the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet, look for moles, look for scars. How are they healing? And at that time, that's when I said, oh, okay, this is beyond just the aesthetics of skincare. But I'll be honest, I still didn't seek out going to see a dermatologist until years later. And very transparently, it was last year. And I went and saw an African-American dermatologist. And when I say it was quite the experience, I did a full body scan. She checked everything. She spoke to me, not at me. There was intentionality in the approach. And so just as I schedule my annual mammogram, my eye doctor, my PCP. I schedule my dermatology visit annually now too, and have done so for my family. And in fact, by doing so, that's how I was able to find out my son earlier last year. He had had a biking accident, and his scars weren't healing well, and he had raised scars. He had keloids. And bringing him in, she said, "Oh, I can do something about this." And yes, that was an aesthetic approach, but unbeknownst to me, he probably would have stayed walking around like that. And, he's 15, so everything is about image. But it was really someone who took the intentionality and the time to talk to me about the importance of my skin as an organ and ensuring that I follow up with care annually. My husband, myself, my daughter, my son, that is a commitment that we have now with our dermatologists.
Amen. So Dr. Mitzi, talk to us about the people that you treat for MS and what are some of the barriers that exist for clinical trial and treatment?
Yeah, so I know I have a room full of experts on this, so I am not going to talk about all the barriers.
Introduce yourself, please. Introduce yourself.
My name is Dr. Mitzi Williams, also known as the Nerdy Neurologist on my social media platforms, trademarked. And I am a neurologist and a neuroimmunologist in Atlanta, Georgia. I have my own practice there called Joy Life Wellness Group, and also have a foundation called the Joy Life Foundation where we do educational programs. So I got interested in neurology a long time ago, but in terms of dealing with multiple sclerosis, I was very fortunate to have an amazing mentor who was a Black woman neuroimmunologist, which at the time of my training, there were only 4 in the whole country. And so essentially, MS has always been thought of as a disease that primarily occurs in women of Northern European descent or young white women. However, when I looked at my lobby in Atlanta, everybody was Black. And so I'm like, the math is not mathing here. And so that led me on a quest to really focus on how we understand MS in the Black community. We now know that the incidence of MS in the United States is highest in Black people. And there are some studies that suggest that the risk may be up to 50% higher in Black women. And so this is really important knowledge, and that led me to start working with research. So certainly there are many barriers to clinical trials, which, as I said, many of you are experts. I'm not going to go into the weeds about that, but I would like to share a success story of a clinical trial that we were able to create with our friends from Genentech. Yes, she said yes. So it was very interesting. So in all of our clinical trials for multiple sclerosis, they're primarily conducted in Eastern Europe. And so when you look at the population, even though we have this data saying that MS really frequently occurs in Black people, there are no Black people in the trials. So most of the enrollment is less than 1%. So we endeavored to create this trial focused on Black and Hispanic people in the United States. And it was quite a heavy lift. So we spent about 3 years creating the protocol. We included patients. We also included advocacy organizations. And it was very interesting because some of the things that we as researchers wanted to do or didn't want to do, the patients were like, no, we want to do that. We want the best study. We want the best care that everyone else is getting. And so there were those perspectives that helped shape the protocol. And I'm very proud to say that we started enrollment in the height of COVID in July 2020, and we over-enrolled by 25%, 2 months ahead of schedule at the height of the pandemic. So this was in a group of people where they said they don't want to be involved in research. So that's just one story of success where we were intentional about the way that we created the trial, intentional about who we included, and it led to very spectacular results that we are continuing to report out today.
Well, amen to that. I want y'all to just kind of, the theme here, she talked to her, not at her, and being intentional. Dr. Cole, introduce yourself, and then same question that I gave to Dr. Mitzi about barriers to care.
Yeah, my name is Craig Cole. I'm an associate professor at Wayne State University's medical school and at Michigan State University's medical school. I'm a myeloma doctor and multiple myeloma and researcher. And multiple myeloma also disproportionately affects people of African descent around the world. It's twice as common in people of African descent than people of European descent. And you know, when I was looking to see what was I going to do with my Heman career, and I just have this crazy passion about tackling the worst thing. The thing that I saw was the most aggressive disease. And at the time, when I had hair, I had a high top fade, by the way. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I got pictures. I don't want to talk about the perm. Well, perm was in high school. The high top fade, thank goodness. Lord, that was awful, but whatever. But I realized that when I went to these meetings for multiple myeloma, that I was the only Black person in the crowd. And I was like, what is going on? I did talks for myeloma. I was the only, literally, for patient support group meetings at 400 people. I was the only Black person in the crowd. So my whole career path took a very, very different turn, where I was like, we really need to push this disease to the forefront. So people, Black people, people of African descent around the country, Latino, everyone understands this disease more. And BlackDoctor.org has been unbelievable in disseminating the information about this disease. Unbelievable. And I mean, I would say easily about once every couple months, somebody has referred to me based on videos that they have seen me do about multiple myeloma. So thank you so much for what you've done. And talking about, success stories for clinical trials.
Absolutely.
I talk too much about my hair. But, and there's something that, I don't want to take Katie's thunder too much, but, the usual enrollment of myeloma clinical trials has been the FDA looked at this, 2.6% Black. When you look at clinical trials in the United States, it runs about 10%. And so the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, which is the main research engine that we do multiple myeloma within, we made a conscious effort to change the culture within the MMRF to be more inclusive to enroll in clinical trials. We rewrote the protocol so that they included lower neutrophil counts because Black people have the Duffy null phenotype, which excludes 17% of eligible Black people from clinical trials. We lowered that and set enrollment targets and disseminated the clinical trials to places that were unreached. And we just found out yesterday that the usual enrollment in the MMRF clinical trials for Black people is about 10%. It's 33%, we found out yesterday. And that is because of a cultural change. That's my little success story.
Well, amen to that too. I mean, we're gonna have some shouting sessions up in here. Y'all keep giving these great success stories. Katie, talk more about how you worked on overcoming barriers to getting into clinical trials.
Thank you, Ellis. Thank you. Thanks, Greg. Katie Wozniak, I'm the Vice President for Clinical Research with the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, and I oversee our consortium of clinical sites throughout the United States. We have one in Canada, but throughout the United States. And I work closely with Craig on our equity issues. This is really our focus. And it is a part of our mission. It has been for years. It is now. It will continue to be. We are driven to reach a cure for multiple myeloma for every patient, And that means we need to make sure that we are representing patients in not only an equitable manner because it's important, but from the scientific perspective, because we have to make sure the science is right. We have to make sure we're hearing the patients, we're addressing their needs, and we are treating and curing them. And that is our goal. And so through our consortium of clinical trial sites, which again is throughout the United States in a variety of geographical areas, we are very focused on reaching the physicians so they can have the right conversations and ask the patients, do you want to be in this trial? Here's why I believe this trial is important for you, and gives you an opportunity for care that you would not otherwise have. But we also work with the site clinical staff. And one of the things that we've not quite heard enough about today and we need to talk about is how do we work with the clinical teams who support the physicians, who work with the physicians, the nurses, the research coordinators. Those are the people often who are speaking with the patients more than anyone. It's the nurse navigators, right? Especially in cancer, especially in oncology. So we work with those groups to educate them on clinical trials, to educate and support them, to talk to patients and to help them to understand what are the opportunities for those patients. And it's through this work that we have been able to achieve, as of yesterday, a 33% enrollment rate, which is awesome. means that more Black Americans are getting treated with a drug that has been proven to have the best success rates in treating relapsed and refractory multiple myeloma ever.
Well, yeah, and Dr. Cole and I, one of the shows we did on BDO was called Blood Brothers, and that was it was intentional to name it that way because it's a bloodborne illness, and Black men are the highest group of myeloma patients. So we really were intentional about how we structured that show, and when we helped some people, probably helped a lot more than we know about, but that's fantastic. So Dr. Barfield, thank you for joining us today. Of course, remember to introduce yourself and talk to us about the underdiagnosis of people of color can often be linked back to the lack of diversity in clinical trials and trial recruitment. What changes can be made to overcome some of these barriers to diversifying clinical trials?
Sure, thanks so much for the question. This is on, I think. So I'm Elaine Barfield, just a quick introduction. I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist. I'm on faculty at New York Presbyterian's Weill Cornell Hospital. And I also, thank you, about a year and a half ago, however, I transitioned to a medical strategy role at Takeda. And in that role, I am on the US Medical Affairs gastroenterology function. And in that role, I lead our health equity and our community strategy efforts. And so I think it's a great question. It's something I think about both now in my role in pharma, and I've thought about a lot when I was treating patients, treating a lot of young children with Crohn's disease and colitis and the like. And I think one thing that comes to mind, this was mentioned earlier in one of the panels, is the distrust that we know permeates many of our communities of color. But I think the problem is when we just stop there and we don't take it further to think about, well, why are these patients not in the trials? I think a lot of times that onus is put on the patient. Well, they don't want to be in the trial, or they can't see a rigorous trial through. And I think that's where we have to make that change. It has to be, well, how can we make it more feasible for them to be in the trial? And if you think about it, there are actually some studies that have shown that when you ask patients of color to join trials, they do. And they join at rates that are equal to those people who are not of color, right? And so I think it really goes back to being inclusive. Just like you just said, Katie, we need to get the science and the data to make sure that the drugs that we're creating that are so powerful are able to be, proven in all people. And I think back to my time when I was scoping every Friday in the endoscopy suite, and the research coordinators would come over and they would try to, consent various children with Crohn's and colitis to join studies. And I'd noticed that the patients of color, my Black and Latinx patients who had Crohn's, the same disease that they were recruiting for, were not being approached at the levels that others were. And so I think it's very real. And I think we have to put the onus on the CROs, on the clinical, the researchers and the sponsors to think about that. One other thing and one other area of change I think to think about is also, and this has been mentioned in prior panels, is our community health workers. We have to engage the CHWs. They are the ones literally living in the communities, engaged with those communities and trusted by those communities, right? And we saw that during COVID when they were instrumental in getting a lot of our communities vaccinated against COVID. And I think leveraging not only our wonderful community partners such as BDO, but also those CHWs that are out there, boots on the ground, doing the work.
Absolutely. It sounds like, Dr. Barfield, what you're saying is people tend to fish where they live. And so if you're going to stay in that one pond, you're going to get the same type of fish. And we have to be intentional, as Dr. Cole said, about where we seek out patients that are to be included in clinical trials. So, Sandra, how can we push for more inclusive research, especially when it comes to dermatology? And is there any advice that you could share with us?
Yeah, and I'm also going to introduce myself because I didn't. So Sandra Ajisafe, I am an executive director for national accounts, and this ties into my response because I have accountability for working with our payers, PBMs, and specialty pharmacies, which are usually your atypical suspects when you think about clinical research. But you'd be surprised. Many of them have interest because once the product has been commercialized and those patients come off of studies, they need to figure out, do I have access to that medication so that they can continue? So many of them actually want to be engaged in patient recruitment, understanding where we're making our investments. So I would say dermatology, any therapeutic area, just ask the questions. Be intentional about the approach. I think the other component to add to that is health literacy. Like we're all saying here, we're a very astute group, but you'd be surprised some of the most astute people, and when it comes to navigating healthcare, where they're challenged. So I would encourage, like, let's really advocate for more health literacy. Let's have intentionality with our healthcare providers and that they're putting aside any biases that they may have and empower patients to really feel confident about advocating for their care.
Absolutely. You know, we were talking about this last night, and some of the challenges that we have in healthcare in general sense is that there has not been a significant increase in Black doctors that are practicing since the 1970s. It has remained at about 4%. And, you know, more Black women have become a doctor, but fewer Black men, but we're still hovering at that 4%. As providers, how do we increase the pipeline? Because you all are asking the patients, you all are standing in those rooms, you were the only Black person in the room, and you're still advocating. How do we get more Black doctors in those rooms to have those conversations, to speak up on behalf of our community?
I think that mentorship is extremely important. I grew up in Atlanta, which I call Wakanda, because literally any professional you can think of lives in Atlanta. There are actually, of the 20 Black neuroimmunologists in the country, 5 of us live in Atlanta. So, I mean, that's how it is. And so I think that mentorship is important, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about partnering with BDO for my show, Brain Chat with the Nerdy Neurologist, because I want people to see people that look like them, you know, and I've had students literally walk up to me and say at a conference, I saw you give that lecture to my class, or I saw you online, and I knew that if you could do it, I could do it too. And so I think it's important for us to be visible so that people can see people, particularly in these subspecialties, right? So many of us are in primary care, which is amazing, but we need more people of color in the subspecialties so that I'm not the only neurologist in the US that people know treats MS. And so I think that mentorship and visibility is extremely important to mentoring that next generation of doctors who will go into the subspecialties and treat each and every one of us.
Dr. Cole?
Ellis, can I? Oh, go ahead.
I bet you're going to say the same thing. I think also, you know, having people of color go into academics, you know, your reach in when you are, you know, in private practice, or your reach when you're, you know, in different types of other industries may be a bit limited. But when you're in academics, you're teaching the students. Right. And I'm afforded a lot of opportunity to travel and to do talks and to take time because it's covered kind of by my academic salary. And so I reach out to, and I did a lecture at a high school. I do a lecture at high school every year, which is predominantly Black. We have a reach out program in Detroit to high school and college students, you know, specifically trying to bring people of color into medicine, but B, when I'm involved, is to bring them to academics. Because we need people of color sitting on the boards of clinical trials to help run the clinical trials, to advocate. Because that's how you make a cultural change. You can't make a cultural change if only one culture is dominating it. You have to have other people involved. And you have to, not only do we need to diversify clinical trials, we need to diversify the people who run the clinical trials, who are involved in the clinical trials, the CEO, or the CEOs, you know, the clinical trial coordinators. We need to diversify, and study after study has shown that people of color are more likely to be involved in the clinical trials when somebody looks like them is also involved in the clinical trials. So getting, you know, young people involved in academics, I think, is a key component to that.
Dr. Barfield.
Just a quick kind of funny anecdote that shows a little of my naivete when I first started in practice. So I'm, you know, within a year of starting as a faculty member, and I had a Black mother who brought her 10 or 12-year-old daughter to see me, you know, complaining of something, maybe it was abdominal pain, what have you. And you know, I'm very new, and I'm being very meticulous and going through all my checklists. And I'm racking my brain and I really can't figure out what's going on with this patient. You know, everything I ask, no, no, no. And so then I see her again for follow-up and the same thing's happening. And so I said, and I'm perplexed and I'm really trying. And the mother pulled me aside after the visit and said to me, there's nothing wrong with her. I just bring her to you so she sees a Black pediatric specialist. And that was something that, first of all, made me want to cry. But secondly, it showed, wow, you know, you don't even realize that walking around, like you said, Dr. Cole, being in academics, how much of an impact that we all in this room have on the young folks. And we really need to embrace that. Yeah. And so after that, I kind of, you know, the mother and I would have a little moment whenever she comes see me. But I absolutely agree with you. Representation matters.
Can I say one quick thing?
Yes.
So it's a similar point, but a little bit of a counterpoint to what Dr. Cole said, because I do think that it's important for all of us to be in academic spaces. But I think it's also important to recognize that people who are not in academics can do clinical research. And so I have definitely had some issues where I'm co-leading this trial, I'm doing all the things, I've got all these papers, but if we submit a paper to, let's say, Nature Reviews Neurology, which is one of the biggest neurology journals, if I don't have an academic affiliation, no matter how many papers I publish, I cannot be an author. Wow. And we had to have a whole meeting. My co-author had to have a whole meeting with their editorial board about when I was going to get my academic appointment, or they were going to have to remove me from the paper. Wow. And so I think it's important to recognize that some of these spaces are people gatekeep these spaces as a way to keep some people out. So it's important that we're in all these spaces, but also to recognize that people who are outside of that space can also conduct research and do it with integrity. And we have to begin to change that model as well.
Absolutely.
I would just like to add too, there's a flow down too that happens as a result of this. So what we see through the Multiple Myeloma Research Consortium, but there are other groups like ours that have sites all over the US, is we include academics, but we also include community sites. Mm-hmm. And what we know is a lot of times the physicians who are at community sites, to your point, and even if they are Black physicians, may not even themselves have trust and confidence to present a trial to that person. And they may not be encouraged to do so by their administration. Right. Or if they are, they're not being given the tools that they need to be able to have that conversation. Or they'll make an assumption, well, this person probably is illiterate when it comes to technology, so why would I give them something on an iPad they can't complete? Like, just things like that end up really causing problems. And unfortunately, within the community setting where we know the vast majority of patients are receiving their cancer care is in a community setting. Right. If that's the level of care that these patients are receiving and the opportunities they're getting, it is no wonder that the rates are 2 to 3% and have been for decades. So it really is about reaching the communities. And we do that a lot in a lot of different ways, which that's a whole other conversation. But I think that that's at the core of it, to your point, because in academics is important. That's where the research is often built and starting. But to your point, we also need to make sure that everyone gets that opportunity to share their data, their experience. Otherwise, we're missing, 70% of the population? That's an equity issue.
I would love to keep this conversation going, but we have to continue to move on. But I think what we have learned today is there has to be something at every point along the path, from the practitioners reaching the patients, asking them to be in clinical trials, to the trials themselves, to faculty, to community, to the pharmaceutical organizations. Everybody has to work in unison in order to lower those barriers to access to care, to continue to move us forward in the research and let our patients get healthier. So thank you all for your time. I enjoyed this panel. You know, they're not like us.
Thank you.
Thank you.